Goedemiddag, dames en heren. Ik hoop dat jullie mij kunnen horen. Ik heb goede hoop dat dat zo is. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome. Thank you for joining at this point. A couple of you sent in some questions, so what I want to do is just quickly have a look at these questions. First one was sent in by Femke. Thank you for sending in your question. It kind of feels like a talk show here. I had a question about the main conflict in the story, The Body of Christopher Creed. Me and my friend have been discussing if the main conflict is what happened to Chris Creed, or if that is something else. Could you answer this question? Of course. And in order to do that, I'm going to take you on a journey to... no, before I do that, is there anybody who can tell me what they think the main conflict is? I think you have there's a chat function to our video, so if you would be so kind as to use that and answer that question that way. So the question is, what is the main conflict in Christopher Creed? See if you can answer that. Let's see if I can see who are watching this. See, 2 people have found their way to the live chat. I hope more of you will along the way. The main conflict is Tori finding out what happened to Christopher Creed, I think. I think that's not the right answer. Where in the triangle, where in the plot diagram do we find the main conflict? Is that at the beginning or at the end? Very disturbing silence going on at this point. Let's have a look at triangle. Sorry. Let's see which one. No, a couple of things missing. This seems about right. Yes. As you can see in this image, there is in this diagram there's no such thing as the main conflict, but it does link up to one of the things we have discussed. Where in this pyramid, where in this diagram do we find the main conflict? What does it link up to? Neil says, I confuse it with the main question. Possibly, but the main question is also, the main question in itself gets answered at the point that Tori finds out what happened to Christopher Creed, although that's only part of the answer. So it remains very important to find out what is the main conflict. The main conflict and the main question are the same thing. So again, do we find the main conflict at the beginning or at the end of the storyline of the plot diagram? Somebody says end. And unfortunately, I have to tell you that that's incorrect. The inciting incident is the start of our plot, of our story. And the main conflict is what follows the inciting incident. So the inciting incident is something that happens, something that creates the whole situation that we find ourselves in. And because of that new situation, we as a reader develop a main question. And what is that main question? And no, before we start, let's just discuss the inciting incident. What is the inciting incident? Where does that story start? Yes, correct, Michelle. When Tori found out he was in the goodbye note, Christopher left a note to uh, to the principal, I believe, when he left. Yes, correct. Tori sending the email at the beginning. That's the inciting incident. Why? Oh no, you've already answered that question, Michelle. Why is it the inciting incident? Because Tori was part of Christopher's note. He was in that note. And what did Michelle say about? No, what? Sorry, what did Christopher say about Tori in that note? What did he think of Tori? My stomach is acting up. Sorry for that. Yes, Tori was perfect, or that he had the perfect life, or that his life was perfect. That's exactly the issue. And Tori is triggered by that because he says, well, I'm not too sure if that's the case. I'm not, he didn't think of his own life as perfect. So that confuses him, and it makes him wonder about the value of his own life. And so that's our inciting incident. That's the point where where Tori gets involved and where he becomes more and more interested in Christopher's disappearance. Okay, at that point, what is the main question that we as readers develop? So what do we start wondering about? What is the main question that we as readers develop? Yeah. What happened to Christopher Creed is part of the question. Who did it is close, but it's not entirely correct. Because who did it kind of it suggests that Christopher is dead. So if the second part is who did it, then we assume that Christopher's no longer alive, and we're not entirely sure about that. Why did he do it? Yes, who is responsible for that? Thank you, Remke. Who is responsible for Christopher's disappearance? Not who's responsible for his death, because we do not know at the beginning whether he's alive or dead. In the end, we do, but in the beginning, we don't know whether he made it. So the main question, there's a number of questions coming in, but I think it should be a combination of Rosalie's answer and Remke's answer. What has happened to Chris, and who is responsible for that? That's a very big part of the no, that is the main question that we ask ourselves. Then the rising action is everything that happens up until the point that there's an answer to that main question. And the answer to the main question is the climax. The climax is the point where we find out what has happened to Christopher. And the point where we get an answer to the second part, which is who is responsible for that. And the question who's responsible for that gets answered along the way. The question of what has happened to Chris does not, because we only get an answer to that in the very last chapter, on the very last page, it seems. But who is responsible for that? That's something that can be answered, I think, halfway through the book. Well, maybe a little bit later, but not a lot later. So who's responsible for Christopher's disappearance is my question to you right now. Who is responsible? Mrs. Creed, his mother. Okay. That's not incorrect. She's definitely responsible in some way. How is she responsible? I'll get to the remark about Haynes' body at a later time. I will discuss that later on. I will get back to that because that is an important event, but it's not necessarily the climax. Treating him as if he's a little kid. Yes, Mrs. Creed has a way of treating her son as if he's completely incapable of making the right decisions by himself. That's true. So Mrs. Creed, because of the way she brought up her son, is responsible. But is that it? Is she the only one responsible for his disappearance? Yes, the whole town or everybody in Steepleton. That's what I was hoping for. Why is everybody in Steepleton responsible? Students were punching him and that kind of stuff. Yes. What else? Because that's the way. Those are the acts that those are the real things they did. But what, in a broader sense, makes them responsible for his disappearance? Everybody is extremely judgmental. Yes, everybody's judgmental. Everybody looks away. Everybody lives there. Yeah, they gossip a lot. That's correct. They live their life the way they think they should. And in the meantime, they don't really look out for others other than the people that they are directly connected to or related to in some way. He was different from everyone. They all point fingers at someone else. That's exactly right. They start. Mrs. Creed starts asking people for help because she wants to find her son, and nobody steps in. The only thing they do is point fingers. That's right, Rosalie. They point fingers. They just want somebody. They just want to be able to blame somebody. They want to be able to stop worrying about it and move on. And in the process of doing so, they don't even think about the real problem, about the fact that they are shallow, that they are unkind, judgmental, and unaccepting of people who are different. So the question of who's responsible for Chris gets answered along the way, and it gets answered by Tori very clearly, because Tori changes throughout the book. He starts out as a typical inhabitant of Steepleton. He is one of those people who is shallow, who does not worry about anybody else other than himself. How does he change along the way? Mm-hmm. To answer your question, Suraj, yes, the stream will be saved. So when it's done, you can still watch it from the start, from the beginning. He started to care about what really happened. Yes, that's part of it. And the contrast with the rest of Stapleton, what's the biggest difference? What is it that Tori has at the ending of the book that the rest of Stapleton doesn't? A sense of he gets a feeling for the boons. Yes, or in other words, he knows it wasn't Bo. Yeah, those are very specific examples. He isn't judgmental, and he has a sense of what? He starts to get that he's to blame too. Yes, correct. He starts to get that he is responsible. He has a sense of responsibility, and the rest of Stapleton merely looks away. They don't want to understand that they are indeed responsible for what has happened. I hope that in this process I was able to answer Femke's questions. Thank you for sending in. So the main conflict, I wouldn't use the word main conflict, I would use the terms main question and the climax in the end. I hope I've been able to answer your question. As for the rest of you, because that's the only question that I got, do you have, people who are listening at this point, do you have any questions about the stuff you needed to study? About Alquin magazine, about... No, nothing has been said about Alquin magazine yet. The difference between Harold and Harold. Of course, I can explain that. Yes, we're talking about 1066, one of the most important battles in the English history, between Harold Godwinson and William the Conqueror and Harold the Norwegian king. And I'm not too sure how I can explain the difference. It's difficult to remember that Harold is of England and Harald is of Norway. Well, what do you want to know about them would be my question. What do you, what difference do you want me to illustrate? I'll answer some other questions in the meantime. What is more important in Alquin magazine, the stories or the fragments? A combination of the two. You have to know how the fragments link up to the bigger picture, in the sense as how, what parts of the story are we looking at, and how do they relate to England at the time? How is the English society at that time represented in the stories that we have read? So neither are more important, they're equally important. You have to answer the questions in either English or in Dutch. You can choose, but you have to stick to your decision. And if you choose Dutch, then names and titles and quotes, of course, can be written in English. So if you choose to write Dutch, then don't worry about the names and the titles. You can still write those in English, but the content of your answers then needs to stay in Dutch. And if you start in English, then you need to stick to that. Okay, I see that Niels's question has been answered about Harold and Harald. Do you need to know every character trait of every character in the book, or do you only need to know the ones of the round characters? I would like you to be able to mention some round characters and some flat characters, and explain why you consider the round characters a round character. So that means that you need to be able to explain what character traits they have developed and how they developed these character traits throughout the story. And for the flat characters, you need to be able to state their one character trait. It's possible, Jeroen, that everyone will answer in Dutch, and if they choose to do so, that's fine. But if somebody wishes to answer in English, that's also fine. If you do answer in English, then your spelling will not be checked in any way. I will check it, but it will not have any influence on it will not affect your mark in any way. So that's not something you need to worry about. Any other questions regarding grammar? Also is also not important in that sense. It does not affect your mark in any way. Like I said, I will correct them, but just so you know, just for your information, it will not affect your mark. Oh right, Worcester and Peterborough. Yes. I'm afraid I don't have the texts here, so that's 1 second. I'm going to check if I have them elsewhere. Be right back. Yeah. Unfortunately, I do not have the texts here, but I can tell you the main difference between the two. It's fairly simple. The two texts both refer to the same battle, and what you need to know about these things, about the battle and about these two texts, is which one of the two is more neutral and which one of the two was written by somebody who clearly chose, who's clearly on one side of the story. So the difference between that's what you need to know about the texts. Which one is neutral and which one is not, and what parts of the text can you use to prove that one of them is neutral and the other one is not. So about the Worcester and the Peterborough passages, read them, reread them, and figure out which one of the two is neutral and why you think so. That would be my my tip there, my advice. Can you explain something about the 100 Years' War and the late Middle Ages? I can. What you need to know about this period in time is that the 100 Years' War, well, first of all, it lasted a lot longer than 100 years, necessarily relevant. The 100 Years' War is kind of the start of a new era, and it caused a new structure in English society. Oh, before I continue, there's a question about the Peterborough and Worcester passages. They're both correct. They're both a representation of what happened, but in one of the two, and it's in the second one, I don't know which one that is because I don't have the texts here, but in the second one, the king who lost in the end, King Harold, is being praised for the fact that he tried and the fact that he was so strong and that he did everything within his power. So even though he lost, they still praise him. So that indicates something. It indicates that that the person who wrote that passage, that's thank you, Jeroen, the Worcester passage, is not neutral. The person who wrote the Worcester passage is on King Harold's side. So I hope that answers your question. Back to the 100 Years' War. The 100 Years' War is important because it caused a new structure in the English society. Many people died during the 100 Years' War, including people in high positions. And these positions used to be reserved for people in the upper class, in the nobility. And because these people died by the hundreds or by the thousands, their positions in the army and in other positions in society became available to people from lower classes. And so the 100 Years' War was crucial to the English society because it caused social mobility, which means that people from lower classes were able to move up. And up until that point, that was very rare. It didn't happen that much, so that often. So the 100 Years' War was important in the sense that it caused social mobility. People could now move up in society. But does that answer your question, Rosalie? In the meantime, I'll answer Suraj's question about the multiple choice question. No, there will not be any. Well, let me check before I state no too clearly. Let me see. Yeah. No test. Well, there is some multiple choice. Yeah. You have to link some events to to names, and there's some true and false statements. So part of it is multiple choice. There's a, let me count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 multiple choice questions. Yeah, Hendrik is right. He's right about that. And there will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 open questions, just so you know. What is the difference between romances and ballads? A ballad, can't you give us a test? Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Well, what you do not, I think you don't need to know anything about ballads, so don't worry about that too much. But the difference is in the content, because a ballad is the ballad is about the supernatural. It's about what should we put it? How should we put it? It's also about a kind of the kind of language used and the way it is written, because a ballad has stanzas of 4 lines, and the rhyming pattern is set in stone. And as for romances, it's more about the content. The romance is about knighthood and about being chivalrous, being a knight and having to fight monsters and having to go through all these extremely difficult challenges to save a woman in distress. That's what a romance is about, and a ballad has entirely different content, and that's more about the shape of the text than a romance is. If you just read the 2 descriptions in Alquin magazine, that should tell you more than I can at this point. This is the main distinction, but if just have a good look at those 2 descriptions in Alquin magazine. How deep into Alquin do we have to go when it comes to learning? What you need to be able to do is link the text to the events in history. So why are the texts that we have discussed, why and how do they represent England and the English society? So what of England at that time do you see in the texts? Furthermore, all the texts that we have discussed are special for some reason or another, they were new, and they brought something into literature that was never done before, or not to that extent. And you need to be able to list those things. So why was each text special, and what impact did it have? Furthermore, you need to be able to know certain types of texts. So the romances, fables. I think that's it. Let's check the list. I think fables are part of it, and romances. So you need to be able to list the characteristics of these texts, and then list their audience and indicate why they were written, what their purpose was. What kind of texts did you find in Alquin magazine? Romance, for example, fables, those kind of, that's the type of label that I'm looking for. Who were they aimed at? Who was their audience, and what was their purpose? So, for example, fables were aimed at the lower class, and their purpose was to educate, for example. The rest of the Canterbury Tales, except the Wife of Bath, is not important to study. No, you have to understand the concept of the Canterbury Tales, the type of text we're dealing with, and you do need to know the content of the Wife of Bath, because she's a very good example of the things that made the Canterbury Tales so special at that time. Will the Christopher Creed questions be based on the important parts, like the picture of the triangle you showed on screen, or, for example, the climax, which you have to dig deeper? I have to have a look at the test to answer that question. You have to be able to describe the characters. You have to be able to link the people in Steepleton to a lot of events. You have to be able to work with a plot diagram, that's for sure. You have to indicate what changes you have seen in the book. That's what I can tell you at this point. Do you have any other questions at this point, ladies and gentlemen? Fox and the Wolf, are they both bad? I don't know a lot about the Middle Ages, since I'm a new student and only joined just recently. All passages from the stories. I think the questions be included in the test. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Dinant, if that's what you're referring to, yes, that will be in the test. I'll get to the plot diagram in a second. As to Axel's question on the Middle Ages and the passages from stories of particular questions being included in the test. There is a passage, but you mostly have to answer from memory. So those will not be questions about the details, but you do need to know the general thought of a story. And there will be there's only one passage. So other than that, you have to answer from memory. Then there was a story about the wolf and the fox. Are they both bad? Not in the same way, not in the same sense. The fox and the wolf. The fox is very sly, very cunning. He's very clever, and he has a very interesting way of getting people to do what he wants them to do. And that's certainly not a positive thing. For him it is, but he's not using it for the right causes. And the wolf is just very simple and stubborn. And because of that, he can be stupid at times and make the wrong decisions. But whether he has a bad and evil character, I wouldn't say so. That's not what's going on. Okay, the plot diagram seems to be a recurring issue. Let's talk about that then. Yeah. What do you need to know about the plot diagram? What is it you would want me to explain? Because part of it, this plot diagram has been part of our curriculum of our program for 2 periods now. What part of it do you want to discuss? Thank you for that, Suraj. I'll consider it, but I'm afraid there's not much I can do. Falling action. Oh, right, the falling action. Well, there hardly is any falling action in Christopher Creed, in the body of Christopher Creed, because as soon as, well, it's difficult, because in the climax, there's 2 climaxes in a way, because the part where Tori finds out who's responsible for Christopher's disappearance, and there's the part where he finds out what has happened to Christopher Creed. And after he found out what has happened to Christopher Creed, there's nothing, because that's the final page in the book. There is a resolution, Stephanie. There certainly is, because we do see how Tori has changed from before the point that he found Christopher's letter. So there certainly is a resolution, because there's no doubt that Tori has changed a lot in the progress that he's made. But the falling action, there is some falling action between the point where he finds out who's responsible and what he does with that information. It affects his relationship to his friends, for example, because he sees that everybody's responsible, and he tries to make people understand that they are responsible, and they just don't want to hear it. So that directly affects, and that would be falling action in that sense. It affects the way he and his friends see each other. There are some questions about the rising action. Basically everything that happens in between. Everything that happens between the point of those friends finding Chris's letter up until the point that Tori realizes who are responsible. Isn't Haynes the falling action? He could be, yes, because Chris, by the point he finds Haynes's body, already knows that everybody is responsible, and he finds the proof of that. He finds proof of the fact that everybody's responsible and that nobody is taking their responsibility when he finds Haynes's body. Philip, I'm going to ask you to watch the first part of the video at a later time, because I've answered that question. And the same goes for Jeroen, because that question was answered at the beginning of this video. So the rising action is basically everything that happens between the point where they find Christopher's letter and the point where Tori realizes that everybody is responsible and that nobody is taking their responsibility. And everything that happens in between is rising action. Stealing Christopher's diary, meeting his girlfriend, initially just hanging out with Ali and Bo, all of that, sitting at in a different position in the bus. Everything's rising action. Everything, especially everything that makes us wonder if we're going to get an answer to the main questions. If you're doubting whether you're going to find the answer on the next page, then that's the point of rising action. If we refer back to the video that we've seen about the plot diagram, the example they used is an example from the Hunger Games, because the question we ask ourselves in the Hunger Games is, will she make it? Will Katniss survive? And each and every time that we are uncertain as to whether she will, if we think, oh no, she's going to die, that's a point of rising action. That's and if we think, okay, she's made it, then that point in the rising action has ended. Difficult to find your climax description. The climax description, no. Climax depends on what part, because we need to go back to the main question, and the main question consists of two parts. What has happened to Christopher Creed and who is responsible for that? What has happened to Christopher Creed is something we only find out at the very end, and who is responsible for that is something we find out, like, it's 70% of the book. If as soon as Tori knows who is responsible, and you can also just read the chat because people have answered this question for you, you'll find out who's responsible. Is that the scene? Will the questions about Alquin all be from the reader? No, but I think about 50 or 60% will be. And if they're not identical, some of them are identical, and others are highly similar. Yes, the main conflict is actually kind of another word for, is another way of describing the rising action, and the main question is what we is the question we are left with by the end of the inciting incident, so at the start of the story. And the main conflict is what we are part of during the rising action. Isn't that the scene where he's sitting on the rock when he's thinking about all his friends? Yes and no. Yes, that's part of it, and no, because it's not just his friends, it's everybody. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to end this. What do they call it? Live broadcast. We're going to end this e-class at this point. Thank you very much for joining. I hope it was useful to you. I hope it helped you. I hope you are well prepared to do your test tomorrow. Good luck. I hope you do well. Make us proud. Do get straight A's. No, we are not. Why are you not well prepared, Suraj? Tell me. Last question. Okay. I'm glad you do, Jeroen. I enjoy it, so we can do this some more. Where do the serves belong? I'm going to just refer to the reader, to the Alquin magazine for that, because you can. They're part of the lowest group, and there's a subcategory. I'm positive about doing this before every test, so yeah, sure, I wouldn't mind. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I hope, like I said, I hope it was helpful. And yes, Jeroen, it is. Have another good look at the name that it was signed with and think about who that really is. Serves are not really, they're not part of the system. They are, but they're not. They're kind of an outcast category. Okay, I am going to end this broadcast right now. Thank you very much for joining. Good luck. Make us proud and do well on your test tomorrow. Have a good evening, boys and girls. Bye.